All right, so today we're going to be talking about Chapter 8, Section 3, also known as the Progressives' Agendas, or the goals that the Progressives are trying to reach as a political party. So we're going to start out in Wisconsin, actually. So Fighting Bob, so Robert La Follette. So he's going to be known as kind of a leader, not only in Wisconsin, but nationally for the progressive movement. A great quote that comes from him here. Men must be aggressive for what is right if government is to be saved from the men who are aggressive for doing what is wrong. So he sees himself as the one fighting for the middleman, fighting for the little guy, the middle class society, the blue collar workers. He says that they are being left behind, that the big business has too much power. And so his job, his role is to alleviate some of those problems for the middle class. So he has a lot of different goals here that he's really going to be pushing for, and he's going to kind of represent the Progressive Party as a whole. So some of his goals in Wisconsin, we need to just kind of think about what he was trying to accomplish and what he wanted people to do. A great story about Fighting Bob, about Robert La Follette, was as the governor of Wisconsin, he really wanted to push for tax reform. He said that the big businesses weren't paying their fair share of taxes, predominantly the railroad. So he's trying to raise taxes on the railroad and have greater regulation upon them. He was working with this other state legislator who also happened to own a business because he needed to have a job in the meantime as well. And the business owner, that they just refer to him as E, he realizes that the railroad needs to have a higher tax rate. As a businessman, he couldn't vote for it, even though as a legislator he supported it. As a business owner, he couldn't vote for it because he knew that if he voted against the railroad, they would simply raise his rates. And if they raised his rates, well, then that would mean he would have to charge more for his product, which in the long run would mean that potentially his business goes under. So he goes back to Fighting Bob and says, it comes down to either doing what's right or bread for my family, and I have to support my family. So he had a tough challenge in Wisconsin. So he comes up with, I put Commissioner of the Week on here. Wisconsin becomes the first state to have a commissioner on the railroad, somebody who's making sure that railroads are charging the same rate to every business. That legislator, that E, as a business owner, Robert La Follette did not want him to be able to bribe the railroad for a better rate. Because keep in mind, as we've been talking about, monopolies at this point were still legal in the United States. So a company could control the market, and the railroad could help determine who would be that victor within the market by controlling the rate. So Robert La Follette wanted to make sure that there was a railroad commissioner to regulate that. He also wanted to make sure corporations were paying their taxes. He did not want them to be able to get away with making money hand over fist and then not pay back their fair share to the government as well. It's also a time of political corruption. So politicians, they have power because they can get these donations from the companies. The companies can essentially buy politicians. And so as we've been talking about the political machines, it doesn't matter who it is, they're getting money from the businesses. So they kind of just see the faceless politician who's able to just maintain power because of the money behind them. So we start to see a lot of reform coming about. That's the big goal here, is to have major reform. And so these are four things that are going to be the big push and the big changes we get from the progressives. So we're going to come up with a direct primary, initiative, referendum, and recall. All things that are still part of our political system yet today, over 100 years later, that are kind of what we see as a fundamental part of our government and democracy yet today. So we're going to start out with the direct primary. The direct primary, it allows the citizens to choose who's going to be the leader or the representative of their political party. So, for example here, right? The Republicans in this last election, this was the field that they had started with initially. As we all know, the victor out of this was eventually Donald Trump. And that was through those caucuses and through those primaries that they were able to finally whittle down to Donald Trump being the official nominee for the Republicans. In terms of the Democrats, Hillary Clinton was eventually the victor in that. But again, the citizens from within that political party are the ones who get to make that decision. Prior to the direct primaries we know it today, it was actually the political party themselves that would make that decision. So the leaders of the Republican National Committee would actually be the ones that would make that decision rather than the vast majority of the citizens. And so they said, you know what, we need to take this power away from these corrupt politicians and give it to the people. So we have the direct primary. With that in mind, we also need to remember Republicans vote for Republicans and Democrats will vote for who's going to represent the Democrats. They can't cross over. Republicans don't get to choose who's going to represent the Democrats. Otherwise, they would obviously pick the worst candidate, right? Independence is a little bit different. If you're a registered independent, generally you don't get to vote in the primary. Now, that can also depend varying on the state. They can open it up to independents and have what's called an open primary, which would allow independents to choose whether they want to vote for the Republican or the Democrats. But again, that's kind of regional. That's depending on the state. The next one, initiative. This is going to allow citizens to actually propose new legislation. We already kind of talked about the women's suffrage movement a little bit. We kind of touched on it and watched a video about having people sign a petition. That's generally where this initiative is going to start, is with a petition. So citizens can go around, they can have other people sign a petition saying they want Nebraska. Let's use that as an example. Nebraska, just this last year, had on our ballot whether or not we should have the death penalty back in the state. So citizens can rally together. They can go around and have people sign a petition whether or not we should have the death penalty in the state again. And if they get enough signatures, they can propose it to the legislature, and the legislature will eventually either vote on it themselves or do the next thing, actually, as it works out. They can issue a referendum where the citizens now get to make the decision. This is actually this is pure democracy at work here. The citizens of voting age get to decide whether or not they support something. The example is a picture here, Brexit, right? So British citizens decide whether or not they want to be a part of the European Union or not, right? Do they want to stay in or do they want to leave, right? In Nebraska, we had a referendum this last election, and citizens actually made the decision that they wanted to keep the death penalty on the books in the state of Nebraska. Finally would be recall, just like the recall of any product, right? Use Michael Scott down here, also Toyota, that they pull things back, right? If something is not good, if it's bad for the consumer, you can kind of think of like lead-based paint on toys. Well, that's dangerous for the consumer, so they recalled those products and took them off the shelves and brought them out of commission. And the same thing can be done with politicians, right? We can say, well, this governor isn't doing his job. Let's remove him from office. And so the citizens get to have a recall vote and have them removed. The final part for today, go the right direction here. The final part for today is talking about the 17th Amendment. And this is the biggest change you can make in the United States, is making an amendment, an actual change to the Constitution, right? This is the most significant change that the progressives will make. They are going to change the Constitution itself, right? So as we read Article 1, Section 3 here, the United States, or the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote, right? So really what this is saying is that every state's going to have 2 senators, right? Doesn't sound crazy there. But those 2 senators are going to be chosen by the legislature of the state. All right, we need to let that soak in a little bit. The government, our senators are going to be chosen by our state legislature, right? Not the citizens. The citizens get to vote on who's going to represent them in the House of Representatives, but the state legislature will choose who's going to represent that state in the United States Senate, right? And that's something that's kind of changed, right? That's going to change with the 17th Amendment. But we need to understand first that the reason that our founding fathers put it in place this way was because they said the people that are working in the state legislature, those are the professional politicians of the state. They know who the best politicians are, and those two best politicians are the ones who should be representing the state in the United States Senate. That way, it protects the state's rights. It's not about citizen rights so much as it is about state rights within the Senate, right? That upper house. But here we're going to come out with the 17th Amendment, and we're just going to focus on Section 1 here. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote, right? And this is the big change here. Elected by the people thereof. It will not be chosen by the state legislature anymore. It will be chosen by the people, because of the amount of political corruption that was going on during the Gilded Age. People were trying to make those changes, right? The progressives are trying to make those changes, removing power from the wealthy and from the corrupt politicians. And the 17th Amendment, even though it wasn't necessarily the greatest amendment, because it is going to change state rights a little bit, it was absolutely necessary in order to limit and try to get rid of that political corruption that was happening within states and within the federal government itself. All right, so those are some of the early changes that the progressives are going to be pushing for. The 17th Amendment will be the most significant one because they actually changed the Constitution itself. All right, have a good day.